Bem, amigos do Quinto Elemento, a gente está aqui de novo em Moscou para falar sobre o quê? Geopolítica, multipolaridade, policentricidade e o que está vindo pelo mundo. Exatamente por isso eu estou aqui com o professor Fiodor Loukianov, que é um especialista, escreve na Global Affairs e também é um especialista sobre geopolítica, professor e um grande analista que a gente vai conversar exatamente para continuar entendendo o que significa esse movimento que está vindo no mundo, que na verdade já chegou aqui para a gente.
Yeah, thank you very much for this conversation. It's not so frequently we meet somebody from Brazil, unfortunately, but I hope that this new era of multipolarity, which is in place, it's not just an idea, it's here. Even the United States stopped to deny it anymore. So I hope that our contacts will be increasingly intensive.
Então, professor, muito obrigado, é uma honra estar aqui com você, né, os nossos espectadores também. E todo mundo fala sobre desdolarização. E estamos falando sobre desdolarização, isso está rolando não só na mídia, isso está sendo uma discussão que está frente no mundo acadêmico, mas também no dia a dia das pessoas. E aí vem a pergunta, quando a gente fala de desdolarização, estamos falando do fim do Bretton Woods System, do sistema de Bretton Woods. E é uma coisa que, ok, parece boa, porque é uma recuperação da soberania dos países, mas ao mesmo tempo, o que a gente vai colocar no lugar? Uma coisa que parece que é mais fácil falar do que fazer. Qual a sua opinião sobre isso?
As for de-dollarization, I'm not a big specialist on economy, but there is a political dimension here. Any currency system is a reflection of cancellation of political military forces, military power. The might of US dollar is based, of course, on the strength of US economy, but to the not lesser extent, on the power of the United States at large. I mean, the ability, primarily by military means, by military control of a big part of the world, to impose agenda, including economic agenda, which is favorable for the United States. And this is fact of life. We might be unhappy with this. Many people in the world are. But I would not say that the short-term perspective is that we will get rid of this system, I mean politically, militarily, and as a consequence in terms of dollarization, and we will shift to de-dollarization. But what is essential, and I think it's acknowledged even in the United States, that Americans themselves do actually everything to undermine the hegemony of the dollar while using dollar as a mean, as a weapon against those who are not agree, try to implement their own agendas in world affairs. And so far, Americans can afford it because, of course, the potential they have and the inertia of the system, and to be very frank, the comfort. Because to use dollar is actually very comfortable for most of business people everywhere. If you only think about business, that's of course much easier to have one currency than to have this very, very complicated system of interstate exchanges and so on. But what we see starting from actually February 22, Americans openly use dollar and the financial regulation as a weapon. Against Russia, yes, but of course all other countries, especially those who don't belong to the sphere of the American influence, they start to think about themselves. Chinese, Brazilians, Indians, Indonesians, and all others. It will not mean that we will see completely new system very soon. Again, the short-term perspective is more or less clear. It will be as now. The middle-term perspective is less clear. The long-term perspective is clear in the opposite way, that the dollar hegemony will be derailed. Dollar and the United States will not disappear, of course. It will be a very important part of the international system, but not the dominating part.
Então, o senhor falou uma coisa muito importante, que é a utilização, e eu concordo plenamente, com certeza, óbvio, que é a utilização do dólar como arma. Isso aconteceu, o Brasil viu isso, começou inclusive com a sua desindustrialização, a utilização da indústria de compliance como meios também para tirar, roubar, capturar a soberania do Brasil, onde o indivíduo não pode nem mais movimentar sua conta, porque ele tem que perguntar previamente, ter autorização da gerente do banco previamente para poder movimentar a conta. E agora a gente vê a questão ambiental, que é um ponto que nós vamos voltar depois, né, dessa manipulação de controle através de ambiental. Mas a gente vê que, por um lado, os Estados Unidos usou a moeda como arma, mas por outro, tanto o Oriente, né, como o Brasil, também não deixa de ser, utilizou a comida e os recursos naturais como arma. Só que você tem um novo pedaço nessa equação, que é a tecnologia. Então, veja o que está acontecendo agora entre China e Estados Unidos. Os Estados Unidos criou uma justificativa para reduzir a velocidade do chip chinês e criou uma sanção contra a China. Ao mesmo tempo que já tinha feito isso com a telecomunicações, por exemplo, na questão do 5G. Quer dizer, há uma tentativa também de predominar um campo econômico. E no Brasil, isso não vem por acaso, ao mesmo tempo está vindo a questão do PL, que eles chamam de PL da fake news, que a justificativa é para garantir, evitar o discurso de ódio, para garantir que as redes vão ter boas notícias e tirar as notícias falsas. Na verdade, são soft power, né, que eles estão implementando lá e que você vê que tudo se trata de controle. Quer dizer, nós já estamos num conflito real, porque para as pessoas normalmente pensam que o conflito é basicamente militar. Né? O povo, conflito é quando sai tiro, mas não é o caso, nós já estamos num conflito. Como o senhor vê o papel do Brasil e essa articulação entre essa nova guerra que está tendo de meios, de controle pelos meios, e o papel do Brasil nesse cenário sob a perspectiva do Oriente?
Okay, that's a great and a very big question. So I try to pick up a couple of elements of this field. First of all, I try to avoid using the notion of sanctions, because what we have now, it's very difficult to call just sanctions. This is, to put it very bluntly but correctly, this is economic warfare waged against Russia in particular, but China is moving towards this as well. So Americans are actually testing the means of economic warfare on Russia to use it then on China or other opponents. And it should not surprise us, because we live in a globalized, interconnected world where interdependence is extremely ambivalent. So in previous decades, we preferred to see interdependence as a good thing, as a way to develop the whole planet together, to help countries to explore their benefits and so on. As you rightly said, it had a backside as well. Mm-hmm. But still, it was seen mainly through the positive lenses. But interdependence means something else as well. If you are connected, if you are dependent on each other, so at any point you can use it as a mean of pressure on the opposite side. And what we said recently, when the Ukrainian campaign started, that was actually how Americans and Europeans turned interdependence from the benefit into the punishment. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's extremely destructive, because when you being interdependent, you use it against your vis-a-vis, but you suffer yourself as well. And we see that Europeans actually go through extremely difficult period when they abruptly cut Russian trade, Russian energy. So this is the process of serious deindustrialization in Europe as well, because it was based on very favorable way to get Russian resources and so on. But that was their choice. They did it, and then now probably they understand how they can go out from this situation. What I wanted to say actually, that this warfare, which is not directly military, be it currency, be it economic interdependence, be it technology, chips, whatever, that was seen all the time as actually a more or less natural element of this globalized world. What we saw last year and increasingly see now is actually a comeback of very classical means. Why so many people, including here in Russia, were profoundly shocked by the beginning of war against Ukraine? Because we actually couldn't believe that something like this could happen in 21st century, year 2022.
Right.
We lived with illusion for several decades, at least after the Cold War, actually even before, during the Cold War, thanks to nuclear arms. We lived in the illusion that big wars between big powers, that's in the past.
Right.
But now we see it's not. And I think that is one of the most dangerous elements of today's world, that wars launched by non-military means, by Americans, by Europeans, by whoever, turns actually very quickly into classical war, big-scale war, on the brink to usage of nuclear arms, what we have now between Russia and the United States. And in this regard, coming back to your question about Brazil and about other countries, unfortunately, the conclusion any serious country should draw is, first of all, military power matters as much as it did before.
Right.
Several decades we lived with the picture that we don't need it. We should not invest in military, that's wasted money. Let's invest in, I don't know, green agenda instead. But, and that would be great if it would be true. It's not. And so now we see that the rearmament process is starting slowly and very difficult, but starting everywhere, including in Europe, which was extremely pacified and pacifistic in previous decades. I think Brazil, as a big country, main territory in Latin America, will necessarily do it as well.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. And this is not just to threaten anybody, but just to feel safe. Secondly, what you mentioned, food, resources, oil and gas and whatever. Yes, indeed. If opponents, Russian opponents, Chinese opponents, if it might come, Brazilian opponents, use their advantages against us, technology, financial control, that's absolutely inevitable that we will use our advantages against them. And this is resources, food, and so on. In Russia, in both cases, water, both in Brazil and in Russia. And all those, with all great respect to the positive environmental agenda, all those claims about global problems that we have, things which we should address together, theoretically, yes. In practical terms, no. Not anymore. It was not the case even before. It was hypocrisy. But at least hypocrisy did exist. Now I think we should get rid of that as well. Because unfortunately, world is in a completely different stage when global problems, global solutions don't exist anymore, at least for a while, for the next period.
Considerando a primeira parte, que o senhor falou sobre a questão dos usos naturais, tem uma questão interessante no Brasil. Hoje, por exemplo, a gente fala da utilização, fala-se da proteção da Amazônia. Só que a gente vê, inclusive com a questão de gastos militares no Brasil, você vê um governo hoje que quer reduzir o papel das Forças Armadas, ao mesmo tempo existem mudanças legislativas que são patrocinadas de uma forma ou de outra por instituições ligadas ao Partido Democrata, ao Jorge Soros, ao Jorge Paulo Lema, inclusive deputados que querem fazer mudanças constitucionais no Brasil de leis que depois não podem ser alteradas, colocando essa agenda, por exemplo, do crédito de carbono como um direito fundamental, tipo a Tabata Amaral e outros, que têm atacado constantemente a soberania do Brasil. Então, como é que a gente vê essa agenda ambiental sendo utilizada para isso? Mas o que tem por trás disso? Tem a questão da legislação, a lei. Então, veja, a gente começa a ver que tem um desejo de criar um Tribunal Penal Internacional, e o Brasil tem aderido a isso, e chega-se ao ponto, inclusive, de inventar conceitos como greenwashing, que é a ideia de que uma empresa finge que está sendo socialmente responsável apenas para a mídia, na prática não está, e isso é um crime como a lavagem de dinheiro, como se fosse o tráfico de drogas, quer dizer, como se fosse uma lavagem do crime organizado. No fim, isso é uma tentativa de criar um sistema legal, um único pensamento, para impor uma única agenda, utilizando soft power jurídico e político. Como o senhor vê o sistema legal sendo utilizado no mundo para implementar uma agenda através da criminalização ou da criação de um sistema legal que coloque essa única agenda para funcionar?
I know that what I am going to say now can be attacked very actively by these distinguished colleagues from those lawyers, for example, who do international law and many others. And international law is officially seen as something sacred. There is international law. Those who violate international law, they are criminals, basically. And the whole world, through United Nations or through other means, should be guardians of international law, which is correct. But what is international law looking from the political perspective, not the legal perspective, but the political perspective? That's an agreement between most important players based on certain balance of their powers and influence and interests, a compromise. It did work in this way any point in the history. International law, international rules are products of big conflicts and solutions and compromises written by those who won, actually, as always. And this is normal. It's absolutely normal. It's the only way how rules can be established. What we have now is that everybody appeals to the international law, while we are in the situation when there is no agreement anymore between those important forces, important entities in world politics, who theoretically should work together to formulate those principles, those norms and rules. We know this notion, American invention, rules-based order,
Okay.
which they see as development, as evolution of international law, while Russian diplomats, for example, and Chinese, by the way, as well, they say that they don't know this kind of international system because what are rules you are talking about? What kind of rules? Who formulated those rules? And of course, the rules-based order is an euphemism, is a substitute for hegemony. Because yes, the Cold War ended in a way that United States obtained this so-called unipolar moment for 25 or so years, when they basically could do whatever they wanted to do, whatever they saw as important and necessary in world affairs, because it was no challenge to the power. And that was actually, it was normal, because if Soviet Union collapsed, primarily it was Soviet fault. We do everything ourselves in this country. And yes, indeed, Americans got this position. But the most interesting phenomenon of this recently ended era, the post-Cold War era, everybody knew who won, Americans and the West. But it was not written down in any documents. So officially, it was no victory. Everybody won. So official hypocrisy, official propaganda. Yes, it was Russia won, China won, everybody. It can work in this way. It can't, because if there is no formal agreement on how the next period should be regulated, international affairs, then it will not work. A while it did, because Americans were so powerful that they could impose whatever they wanted on everybody, and everybody accepted for a while. This while ended actually more or less at the beginning of 21st century, 10 or 15 years after the end of the Cold War, it was over. And then it started to erode everything. Coming to your question about soft power, about Soros, about when you have a hegemon which is able to project power, all kinds of powers, including soft power, but there is no formal legal ground for that, except just a lot of propaganda, then sooner or later you arrive to the difficult situation, because as long as Americans were as powerful that they could just tell countries, nations what to do, and they had to do it, okay. But they started to gradually lose this influence. And then, of course, big powers. There are countries who have no interest in sovereignty, okay, that's their choice. But those who have, like Russia, like China, like Brazil, like India, whatever, many, they started to ask, but why should we follow your agenda if we don't believe that it is in our interest, and we actually are sovereign nations? And as it is no formal way to put pressure on them, then American-led system created a lot of informal ways, including regulation, including soft power to NGOs and so on. I don't dare to say that everybody who follows ESG agenda, for example, are bastards who want to destroy sovereignty of other states. Of course not. Many people are very sincere and they believe in this, and the idea is very great actually to make our planet much better. Yeah. But those who believe, they are being used by those who probably don't believe, but they have interests. And from my point of view, what we have now, that's a very complicated, very difficult and dangerous period, but the main substance of it is exactly what you say. Nations, big nations, which are not necessarily against the United States. They might be very much connected to the United States, but they start to insist that their sovereign legal systems, their sovereign constitutions, they are above the supranational laws or rules. And this is a trend which we see everywhere actually, not only in Russia, which is at war with the United States de facto. Everywhere, even in Europe, with being completely suppressed by Americans, sometimes they try to do something, not successfully. But in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, the question, why should we follow rules formulated somewhere else without our agreement, that's the key question now.
Então, mas aí o senhor falou, qual o caminho? A gente vai reformular, a gente pode reformular as instituições de Bretton Woods, pode reformular o Conselho da ONU, pode reformular toda a ONU. Qual seria o caminho para a gente tentar ter um balanceamento melhor? de poder e de opinião sobre as questões regulatórias que estão sendo feitas no mundo?
Would have an answer to your question. I would probably apply for a Nobel Prize,
Right?
just to change the whole world system to make it just, fair, and safe. I don't have this answer, but a couple of elements. First of all, what we have discussed already, the military component. That's, unfortunately, that's absolutely indispensable anymore. Countries which want to preserve their sovereignty, they will need strong defense and strong military capacity. Again, not to attack anybody, not to try to annex territories or whatever, but to feel safe and to feel sure that their interest will be taken into account by bigger players. By the way, it's not very positive for us, but I think that Ukraine, for example, after this war, whatever will happen to this country, how it will look like, but that will have much more to say to the world affairs. It's not good for us, but they proved that they have something. Right. So for any country, especially for big countries like Brazil, I think it's very important. Secondly, in Russia, we went to a relatively long period, starting from early 90s until very recently, with an extremely destructive ideological message. We don't need to produce everything. We can buy. It's much better economically.
Right.
To produce cars, our cars, it does make sense. Better we invite somebody or we buy. Same with aircrafts, same with many other technological, and not only technological goods and products. Based on the assumption that under any circumstances we can buy. Now we can't.
Right.
And so we see that there are elements, segments of economy, segments of life actually, which were 100% dependent on other countries, and most of them are unfriendly countries. And so now this is a very important lesson. I hope that Russia will learn it once and forever. And now we'll do everything to overcome this problem, because now it's a very severe problem, right. to be frank with you. What I mean, it does not mean that any country in today's world can be isolated, autarkic. No, of course not. But to be able to produce everything you can produce and to develop a self-sufficient economy, at least there where it's critically important, that's a must. For countries inside NATO, for example, probably not that important. They can rely on Americans or not.
Right.
Who knows what will happen? Yeah, now the biggest fear in Europe is that 2024, Mr. Trump will be back.
Right.
What to do then? His views on Europe are very well known. Right. So coming back to your question, I think that military might, economic self-sufficiency to the extent it's achievable, sovereign legal system, what we discussed, a rational, reasonable use of resources which we have. A reasonable means that you regulate yourself. It's not a free market anymore.
Right.
You buy and you sell having political implication in mind. Look what happens to the oil industry. Oil market was free and global even during the Cold War. Despite this confrontation and the nuclear standoff and so, that was a global market. Soviet oil, Iraqi oil, whatever, Venezuela. Now it's basically fragmented, because Russian oil goes to one part of the world, Arab oil to another part, and so on. It's apart. Is it good? I'm not sure it's good, but it's fact of life, and that will be the next period of our international development. Which means that for Brazil, for example, those assets you have, you should just understand that this is an asset,
Right.
not only economic but also political. Again, it does not mean that countries possessing something, be it Brazil, Russia, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, should blackmail, God forbid.
Right.
But to use it to indicate how to guarantee more sovereignty and more independent decision making, that's for sure.
Então, professor, eu queria falar sobre diferenças dentro do bloco, porque a gente fala sobre multipolaridade, mas tem uma diferença dentro do bloco. E esse bloco eu falo que é a Rússia, China e os países árabes. Olha o que aconteceu, você teve uma mudança, né, com toda essa mudança da economia. O que aconteceu é que a poupança ficou no Oriente, no Oeste, e a dívida aqui. Os Estados Unidos entende que poderia resolver isso, mas isso é uma questão de políticas econômicas que eu não vou abordar na pergunta. Mas olha a reação. A China, então, usou isso como investimento estratégico para aumentar as relações de domínio do Brasil, saiu de uma negociação na América Latina de pouco mais, há 20 anos atrás, de 12 bilhões por ano para 450 bilhões por ano. Um número relevante. Os países árabes e alguns do Oriente fizeram os fundos soberanos. Catar, Dubai, Coreia do Sul, Singapura, criaram fundos soberanos que fingem trabalhar por EBITDA, fingem trabalhar por negócio, mas tem uma lógica política, são fundos de países. E utilizam do sistema jurídico para fingir que não estão fazendo esse tipo de investimento. Pega o mapa do Brasil, da América Latina, você vai ver que aquele cinturão de infraestrutura, a China já está circulando o Brasil com vários países, né, e que fazem parte desse cinturão. E aí é um problema para o Brasil, porque você está falando de infraestrutura e logística, eles estão contornando a logística do Brasil. E é aquela história, bom, se eu tenho as balas, o que adianta se eu não tenho as armas? Basicamente, aliás, o que aconteceu no sistema financeiro, a gente pensava que ter o dinheiro, os recursos eram suficientes, e os Estados Unidos rompeu com a mobilidade de capital. Isso está acontecendo e a gente está vendo, quer dizer, o Brasil hoje olha e fala, peraí, e a Rússia? A gente não deveria apertar ou estar mais conectado estrategicamente, considerando que a Rússia tem fertilizantes, o Brasil produz comida e pode aumentar essa relação com o Oriente, não só com a China, mas com os outros países. Não deveria haver uma conexão, quer dizer, a Rússia não deveria também estar mais proativa em buscar essa conexão. E a gente também não está apenas trocando de dono, né, saindo de uma política, nós, né, dominada pelos Estados Unidos, para cair no colo da China e dos árabes como controladores disso?
Yes, that's a very good question. Just one nuance, one difference. China and Arabs, yes, indeed, this is in the extreme form, it might be some kind of new form of colonialism, but from the East, not from the West, but from the East. But neither Chinese nor Arabs will try to impose anything on you, on us, but extracting money.
Okay.
They are not interested to transform Russia, Brazil, or so. Americans do. That's their philosophy. They need to improve people everywhere, and we see it. We saw it. Yeah. As for how to do it, how to deal with this, I think the only way is to diversify and diversify all the time, everywhere. Russia made numerous mistakes after collapse of the Soviet Union. And the biggest one, which we have the product, the results of it we have now, that was excessive Europe and West centrism. So Russian leaders, including Putin, in the first period of his rule, they had one picture in mind. They wanted Russia to be part of the extended West. On special terms, with special preferences and conditions, but still. Both Russia in the 1990s under President Yeltsin and Russia in 2000s under President Putin wanted to get a proper place, but in the Western-centric system.
Okay.
Which was a great idea, which could never fly, because they don't want Russia to be equal part of the West, and Russia is not culturally, is Europe, but is not Western Europe, it's not the West. And unfortunately, it took almost 30 years to grasp, to understand that it will not happen. But during those 30 years, everything, including economic activities, was focused on this. That's why our relationship with Europe became absolutely essential and indispensable for our economy. And those resources, those capacities which could go somewhere else, including Brazil, they were channeled to Europe only. Now there is a big change. I don't believe that our split with Europe is forever, but it's for a very long time. And it will probably never come back to what we had in 2000s and beginning of 2010, which is not good, but which opens up new opportunities. And Russian main task today is to bridge gaps, all gaps we had with other parts of the world, including Latin America. Latin America, Brazil in particular, are ideal partners for Russia because actually we have no controversies at all. We have nothing to fight for against each other, nothing. And yes, the geography is not very favorable, it's very, very long. At the same time, in today's world, despite this fragmentation which I meant, but this is a system which is unified. So now it's a very stupid situation with the European and Americans aerospace closed for Russia. So to come to Brazil now, we need to spend, I don't know how many, 16 hours or maybe.
Go to Dubai.
Yeah. But sooner or later it will change. So I think that coming back to our general discussion about multipolarity, the multipolarity means that you try to keep as many relations and partnerships as possible with everybody who is interested. Those who are not interested, feel free.
Okay.
Those who are interested, welcome. Brazil should be on this course, Russia should be on this course. In our case, we have problems with that as well, because unfortunately there are a lot of resentment vis-à-vis the West, which partially destroys the rationality. We wanted so much to become part of the West that now, as it failed, we hate the West so much as even bigger than we wanted to. It's not good for a nation in historical terms, but I hope that it will be stabilized. But countries like Brazil, and actually what I try to promote here all the time, now especially as Russian culture and Russian literature and Russian and cultural exchange between Russia and the West is being cancelled more or less by Americans and Europeans. It's not very nice, but okay. The world is much bigger. Do we know much about Brazilian culture? No, unfortunately. Do we know much about culture in India or in, I don't know, in Africa? Yeah. No. But it's needed because this is the West is minority in today's world. Tiny minority, actually. Powerful, but tiny minority. And I think that, I hope that this war, the Ukrainian conflict, will end anyhow at a certain point, because of course it's a big tragedy what is happening. And after that, we will start to establish a new map of relationships beyond the West, bypassing the West, including the West, it doesn't matter, but with the whole world, including Brazil and Latin America.
Professor, o senhor disse que, por exemplo, é um bom ponto cultural que o Oriente, o Ocidente, desculpe, o Oriente, por exemplo, hoje, a Rússia, em alguns lugares, já amou o Ocidente, acho que começou até com Pedro Grande, quando abriu a Rússia para o Ocidente, mas... E agora tem um outro extremo, que é eu odeio o Ocidente. Ok, mas olha só, o Ocidente não é um bloco unificado. Aliás, o Ocidente está dividido no Brasil e até mesmo nos Estados Unidos, entre os republicanos, o Partido Democrata, muito por causa da cultura woke. Por trás das decisões econômicas tem as decisões políticas e elas são fundamentadas, do meu ponto de vista, eu concordo com as decisões morais. E aí entra um ponto que eu queria te perguntar. Você acha o quanto que esse soft power cultural anti-woke criado no Ocidente, que uns têm, ou a própria cultura woke, tem influenciado a questão geopolítica a ponto de fazer com que aí sim, conservadores ou pessoas no Brasil se alinhem ao pensamento do Oriente do ponto de vista geopolítico? Porque, por exemplo, quando o presidente Putin defende valores como a família, o cristianismo, a tradição, isso toca em muitos brasileiros, isso toca em muitos americanos classe média, porque muito do efeito da cultura woke é a destruição da classe média e a imposição de uma única forma de pensar e viver. Quer dizer, o quanto que esse soft power, quer dizer, quanto essa cultura woke, os valores morais são determinantes hoje para uma decisão geopolítica no mundo?
Yeah, that's very, very, very good question, because it leads us to the main point of international controversy now. The woke culture, which you mentioned, without criticizing or praising, this is a product of very clear, very severe problem inside the United States. This is the way how certain groups try to respond to the split of society. Of course, we know that American society has always been very unfair, inequality, and a lot of problems. That's normal as any other society. When Americans became suddenly hegemon in the world, their internal politics spilled over to the whole population of our planet, which is not good. It's their problem. However, they will be able to address their internal problems. I'm not sure that the woke agenda is the right way to do it, but it's up to them. But this attempt to internationalize domestic trouble, it's very destructive for the world, but it's also destructive for those who try to do it at the end of the day. Look, you being from Brazil, I think you know it even better than me. Partially, at least, this new agenda in the United States and in Europe is based on the acceptance of the guilt for slavery, for discrimination, for colonial past. They say so, and they make a lot of things. They find absolutely no response from those who actually suffered from colonialism and racism, and so in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, because those people, they understand very well it's not about them. It's about Westerners again. They do something inside their society using slogans, and I think that this is very telling, because the egocentrism of the West has been a big advantage for them for a very long while, but now it's starting to turn to the problem for them in their international communication. And I think it will increase, this gap will increase. In this regard, Putin's message, which at least theoretically should be appeal to a traditional normal, I guess that it might be quite might get a response in many constituencies around the globe.
Right.
There is another side of that. I hate extremism in all forms. I hate this extremism which you mentioned, this woke agenda and so on. But another extreme is so-called conservative extremism. We believe that we can reinstate the way how people left 200 years ago and live now. It's stupid, and that's, unfortunately we have this trend as well in Russia. I don't think it will fly in contemporary world.
Not feasible.
No, it's absolutely not feasible. It might poison a little bit this normal conservative agenda, but at the end of the day, the normal will prevail. Frankly, I would be happy if Russia would be able to formulate the new posturing on the international stage based on the moderate conservatism appealing to the traditional values but without extremes.
Right.
We are not there yet. We are, so to say, trying to find something. Putin sometimes is very right in what he's saying. Sometimes he sounds, frankly, very reactionary. And so, but in his nature is actually a very, I would say, a very reasonable guy. He used to be. Mm-hmm. And he tries to find reasonable solutions for any problems from the beginning. With the West, it didn't work, unfortunately. Hopefully, it will work with the non-West.
I agree. Agora vem um ponto para a gente terminar. Muitas pessoas falam que esse conflito, o verdadeiro conflito, não é entre estados, entre polos. Quando você vai lá ver a origem do conflito, ele pode ser resumido pelo conflito entre o indivíduo, a liberdade individual versus o Estado, ou uma tradição versus liberalismo, com uma raiz filosófica, teórica, política desse conflito. O senhor concorda com isso?
Not exactly. I'm afraid that the real situation is much more complicated, unfortunately. Of course, as normal human beings, we try to find a more or less simple and understandable scheme for everything. Right. But it doesn't work in today's world. You see individual freedom versus state control. The world which proclaims individual freedom, as we mentioned in our conversation, is being controlled in a way which states would only dream about. Individual freedom becomes a means to manipulate everything. State control tries to be overwhelming and fails on all fronts almost constantly. At the end of the day, we see a process which is not encouraging, but which is obvious. You remember those utopian or dystopian books from first part of 20th century, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell. And some people believed that there were different kinds of described the future. Orwell described this total state monopoly, totalitarian states. He was inspired by experience of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union. Huxley described the technological, this soulless future. In fact, what we see is it's the same. Now it's the same. Technology is coming from liberal societies, with state authoritarianism coming from non-liberal societies. They are intertwined. And at the end of the day, who is the main advanced technological state in terms of control? China. Mm-hmm. And United States and the West, they do everything to catch up with this, saying that in our cases it's not about control, it's about security. So we are democracies, that's why in China there's totalitarianism, but it's ridiculous. Of course, when you get the means to control, you use it. democracy, non-democracy, it's even worse, because democracy, we see it everywhere, democracy is being turned into endless manipulation. So under slogan that you are free to choose. Mm-hmm. And so in this regard, I'm afraid that we are in the middle of extremely dangerous process. And as you rightly said, military conflicts, for example, are not the worst what is happening. It's bad enough, but it's more or less traditional. But all these disruptions in societies, which most likely will not be cured in any kind of foreseeable future. And more than that, the more advanced society, the bigger risk it faces. In this regard, when Russia will be a bit behind, I would say maybe it's better.
Ok. Queria agradecer muito, professor, a sua entrevista, foi muito boa. A gente esclarecedora para entender um pouco do ponto de vista também do Oriente e como o Brasil pode estar se posicionando. É difícil, não é simples, a gente não tem uma resposta única. Mas eu queria agradecer seu tempo, a você do Quinto Elemento. Não esquece de curtir, compartilhar, coraçãozinho, mandar para todo mundo. É uma grande aula de geopolítica do professor Fiodor. E eu queria saber o seguinte, para aqueles que querem seguir o seu trabalho acadêmico, ler sobre geopolítica, entender um pouco da perspectiva do Oriente, os trabalhos acadêmicos sobre geopolítica, se existe um jornal, um site, notícias, revistas que eles podem seguir. Então, por favor, professor, palavra final a sua.
Yeah, thank you for this. My main job, at least my favorite job, is editor-in-chief of a journal which is called Russia in Global Affairs. Right. This is in Russian and in English, so feel free to visit. It's accessible on the web, free. And another hat I have is International Valdai Club, where President Putin speaks each year. And Valdai has a website in English with a lot of comments and so. And of course, using this opportunity, we are very much interested, be it in my journal or in other capacities, very interested to have a Brazilian view and Brazilian understanding of what is going on. Right. So what we discussed with you is exactly what people in Russia are concerned about.